Welcome to my first Q&A of the Amish culture. As most of you have known or have heard my story, if you have not heard my entire story, you can go back and find it on my channel underneath the playlist of my story and listen to my story. And I have taken the top 10 questions that I always get about the Amish culture, and I'm doing a Q&A over them. If I don't cover the questions that you have, comment below and I will do another Q&A as soon as I get another 5 or 10 questions. I'm Emily and I'm here to inspire and empower you to become the best version of yourself. Before I get into this video, do me a favor and hit the subscribe button because that's how I grow, that's how I get my message out. I would appreciate it. And if you have questions, always feel free to comment below. I go back and comment to everyone's questions and answer them as I go. So just to get into it, one of the most common questions I get is, why do they only go to the 8th grade? Well, that's a good question. I don't know who set the standard for 8th grade education, but what I can tell you, they don't feel like it's necessary to go to public schools. Now, different Amish in different communities will go to public schools until they reach a certain age limit, and then they're done going to school. They won't graduate with a high school education. When I went to get my GED, so I went to 8th grade, and then at 17 I left. And when I went to go get my GED, I actually tested at a 6th grade level of education. And so that's frustrating for me because now I'm like, that is crazy. Like, how does that happen? But that's their culture. That's how it's always been. I do know, because I've been contacted by different agencies to help try to change this from a government standpoint. There's some groups that are actually trying to push the Amish to change this to allow their children to be educated. And so in the Amish culture, if I had wanted to go to college, there's no way that I would be allowed to go to college. I would not be allowed to get my high school education. I would not be allowed to go to college. They don't feel like that's necessary, especially not necessary for a female. Because in the Amish culture, the females don't have a career. You're a mom, that's it. Like, you're just a stay-at-home mom and that's it. So with that being said, the subjects that we had in school, we had vocabulary, we had spelling. Their spelling was just kind of like memorizing ththese words and what they mean. English was not your normal, like, it wasn't writing papers or anything like that. Our language was like a High German, like the German, not the Pennsylvania German that I speak. We had Bible verse studying, we had math. In our math was very different. We didn't have algebra, we didn't have trig, we didn't have geometry or anything like that. It was just like your basic math. We did some fractions. And then later, as I went into college, I actually had to take 2 additional college courses to be able to get into test to get into Purdue, because I wasn't taught any of that. So that's kind of overall how their studies were. The classrooms, most of the classrooms are broken up in 2 different rooms. So grades 1 through 4 sit in one room with one teacher, and grades 5th through 8th sit in the other room with another teacher. And that's how they break up the classrooms. Their teachers are not certified. It's usually just someone that wants to teach. So they're not certified in any level. And they just go in and they teach, and that's how their classrooms are ran. And it's very different from what the public schools are ran. And so throughout our day, we would get there, we would start class, the bell would ring, we would go in, always have devotion, worship time, because it is a very religious culture. And then throughout the day, we would do our lessons that were prepared, and every day we would have different subjects. It was kind of broken out like that. But that was kind of the basics of the education. And quite honestly, the education, I never wrote a paper day in my life. So when I went to college, I was like, write a paper what? Like 5 pages long? And now I'm writing a book, like multiple books. Interesting, right? I will have a good editor though. I will say that. I will have a good editor. The next question is, what did you do for fun while growing up? I always get this. So I was a tomboy, so naturally I was always outside playing with my brothers, playing with, friends. We didn't have much friends like come and go throughout the week. It was kind of like we just stay with family until on Sundays we would always get all together at church or the gatherings or whatever. but I would play with my brothers a lot. I was outside, rode a lot of horses, played a lot of sports like basketball, softball, whatever it was, played a lot. So I also read. I love to read, so I read a lot. But we played games, like we entertained ourselves just like regular kids. We just didn't have technology to do it for us. We were very creative. So that's kind of what we did for fun. We did go on some family vacations. So it kind of depended on, like, one year we went to Niagara Falls. The next year we went to Florida. It kind of depended on, and we went to Tennessee. So we did go on vacation. So that was always fun to do that in the summertime. And we did, around the holidays, we always got together with family. It was very, family oriented for Christmas, Thanksgiving, Easter, the big holidays. And then the next question is, why do some of the Amish have electricity and others don't? So there are different versions of the Amish. There's some that have electricity. They feel like it's okay to have electricity. There's some that don't have electricity, but they have running water. They have gas refrigerators, gas stoves. And then there's those that don't have anything gas. They use kerosene. They don't have running water, so they still use an outhouse. They still pump their water by hand. So it just kind of depends on what kind of community you encounter or where you go on whether they have electricity or not. So there's the New Order Amish, there's the Old Order Amish, and then there's still an Old Order Amish, but they believe differently. So it's just kind of like, depends on where you live at. I was raised in the Amish that did not have electricity, but we did have gas stoves, we had running water, so it was almost like having electricity. You just couldn't flip the switch and it was going, but because we had gas lights. So it kind of just depends on what community you are living in. And then the other question, number 4, do I regret leaving? Hell no. I do not regret leaving at all. My life has changed so differently. If I would have not left, I would probably be married somewhere with like probably 6 or 7 kids and hating my life because I would not have a voice and I would not have a degree. I would not have a career. I would not be able to make an impact the way I am making today. And that was not the life for me. And I knew that growing up, like I knew I was meant for more. And I was like, there's no way that this is going to be my life. I'm just not going to do this. So I do not regret leaving. If I had to go back and do it over again, I would still leave. I would probably find a better solution than leaving the way I left. But if you want more on that story, you need to go listen to it. We all learn, right? We all learn and grow. But I would definitely leave again, 100%. And if I could give any advice to those that are in the community that are thinking about leaving, leave now. Do yourself a favor and get out, because it is a cult. It is not healthy. It is very, very unhealthy, and it's traumatic. And you don't realize the trauma that's actually tied to being in a cult. You don't realize the programming and the bullshit that you go through and all this stuff that you have to work through afterwards. And so I would say if you're in a cult at all, whether it's Jehovah's Witness, whether it's Amish, whether it's Mormon or whatever the cult is, get out, because it is not healthy. It is so brainwashing. And that's just my personal stance on it. So I definitely do not regret leaving. The next question is, why do they dress the way they do? Good question. Wow. Their version of dressing is always to dress modest. So their modest dress is to like not have a whole lot of skin showing, to make sure you're appropriate at all times. And they sew like 90% of their clothes. So they're all about dressing modest. And they say in the Bible, because the Amish culture try to tie everything back to bits and pieces of the Bible, right? Because it's a religious culture. And so they say to be modest. So this shirt, for example, wouldn't consider being modest, right? It would be, you needed to be dressed fully. And, which is interesting, right? Because now I'm like, this is modest. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. But they dress that way just to stay modest. So that's the reason why they dress the way they dress. and wearing dresses my entire life. When I left the Amish, I didn't wear a dress for years. I refused. I was like, no, I'm not wearing a dress. Dresses are stupid. But now I'm back to wearing dresses because they're comfortable. But the Amish dresses were not comfortable at all. Not at all, because you had to wear this layer on top of a layer. Like, it wasn't just one whole dress. It was a layer on top of your front and a layer around your stomach, like an apron. Like, it was crazy, and it sucked. It really sucked. The next question, where do they go to the hospital? Or where do they get their medical support or supplies or whatever? So some of them do go to the hospital. I would say majority of them do go to the hospital. There are some holistic health places that people will go to. There are some other places that they will go to, but majority of them do go to the hospital. Even though they don't have insurance, they usually try to work with the hospital to try to set up those payment plans or pay in full if they don't have insurance. So most of them do go to the hospital for medical supports. And then the next question is, what is the typical parent relationship? And is it traditional? And what impacted me the most, good or bad? So I will only speak for this in my family household. I don't know what the other families, each family is different in the Amish culture, right? Just like any other worlds, like everybody's going to parent a little bit differently. So for me growing up, the parent relationship really was very like, they're the parents and they are always right. You don't argue, you don't talk back, you don't have an opinion. And even if you do have an opinion, you don't say it because that's disrespectful. And so growing up, I was very much a daddy's girl. I went everywhere my dad went. I loved hanging out with my dad. Me and my mom didn't get along very much. We argued quite a bit, and I would get in trouble for arguing. But with my dad, it was because we were outside. I was always with the horses, helped my dad like train horses, helped him in his business, and I did all these things, as soon as I was out of school. I went everywhere with him. And even though I was with him a lot, I didn't necessarily have like super close where I could confide in him to be like, hey, I'm actually feeling like I don't want to live in this culture. Like, when it came to talking about culture things, you just didn't have that conversation because that space was not provided. That safe space was not provided. If I brought up, whenever I question, why do I have to wear black socks? Why can't I wear gray or white? It was like I was being disrespectful. I wasn't respecting the rules that were put in place. And so therefore I would get in trouble for that and get, reprimanded of like, don't ask those questions. This is the way it is and it's not going to change. So, and it always seemed like every time that I asked those questions, I was pushing the limits. So therefore I was being rebellious by pushing those limits. So from a parent relationship, I didn't have the closeness to be saying, hey, this is how I'm feeling. And it was not respected of how I'm feeling. It just wasn't. It was like, no, I'm your parent. I'm right. And it doesn't matter what you feel or say. Now, I personally don't parent like that anymore. I don't parent my boys that way because I want them to have that safe space. I want them to tell me how they feel. When they're frustrated, I want them to be heard. And so growing up in that culture, I was never heard. It was always like, no, you're not heard. And even in the church or anything else that's going on inside the culture, the women aren't heard. They're not heard at all. It's like the men make the rules and that's how it goes. And so from little up, that's how you're programmed as a female. The guys make the rules. Oh, that's what's going to make him happy? Cool, I'm going to do that. It's very, very male dominant, which just really fucking blows my mind sometimes. Like, it blows my mind. It's very, very male dominant. And so growing up in that and being programmed that way, I had to do a lot of reprogramming. So my parent relationship, I would say, it was very like, they're on a pedestal, I'm down here. I'm not going to be able to change anything and I'm not going to be heard. And quite honestly, it sucked. It sucked because I didn't have that closeness. And I knew I was loved, but they never said I love you growing up. If there was never like any hugs or saying, hey, I love you, like you're doing amazing, or anything of that sort. It was, I also felt like there was very high expectations because there's a lot of comparison going on. There's a lot of, making sure you're doing this to achieve, making sure that you're doing all these things that no one's judging you for. And so there was always this pressure to perform. And that was always a high pressure too. And, high expectations. Oh, you're smart in school. You better not get any F's. Or you better pass with, straight A's. So there was that. What impacted me the good was I was taught how to work. Like I was taught work ethic. That was the good. I was also taught how to give. But I will say the bad was I was never really taught how to receive, how to truly receive. And so that's one of the things I've had to learn, how to receive. The good was, I was taught work ethic, how to work, how to show up and work without complaining, get the job done, and keep moving on. And I'm incredibly grateful that my parents taught me that. My dad taught me a lot on the business side. I got to watch him in action, like on true entrepreneurship. But he taught me really on the business side on, the finances, paying bills, paying, all these things, how to run a business, customer service, these incredible things. And he's very well known for his customer service and the businesses that he does build, which I'm super proud of him for doing that, because I know how it's not easy. So that was really good to learn that at a young age. I did learn how to cook from my mom. So I'm incredibly grateful for that. But the bad part was I had to learn what self-love was. I had to learn how to love myself. I had to learn how to be my true, authentic self, and that it's safe to be me. And I had a long road of this. That it's safe to be me. I can support myself and I can take care of myself. I've never been taught that in the Amish culture because I'm a female, right? The guy's always going to take care of you. He's always going to control things and he's always going to take care of things. And knowing that I can provide for me and my boys at all times was a valuable lesson that I had to learn. And that and self-love and self-forgiveness, those were the things that I wasn't taught, and that I learned how to forgive others, but not how to forgive myself. And so that was probably the negative side of the parenting, of not teaching me that, and also teaching me self-worth. So I can go on and on about parenting and what I was and wasn't taught. But it's all my path. It's all my journey. The next question is, if you decide to leave, will the community support you? So if you go to like the new order Amish, maybe a few of those communities might be a little bit more flexible in far as like if they're going to put you in a bond, or if they're going to like not support you. But in my community that I was raised in, absolutely not. If you made the decision to leave, you were out. There was no supporting, and there was no going back. And my parents made it very clear, if you leave, do not come back. Because I had younger siblings and they didn't want me to influence them to leave as well. So there was no support. So at 17, I'm sitting there, my parents telling me like, you're disobeying us, so therefore you're disobeying God, and therefore where you're going to end up at, because it's an unforgivable sin. And then after my parents were done, then the church and the community steps in and starts having conversations with you. And those conversations are like, you're killing your parents by leaving the Amish culture. And God doesn't like when we're rebellious, and we really need to just really understand that God wants you to stay here. And it's very brainwashing tactics, anything from letters to phone calls to personal visits in like they come to visit you at your house and ask to speak to you, and you don't have a choice but to speak to them. So at a young age, I got really good at looking at you and not hearing anything you say, because that was my coping mechanism. Because the amount of guilt that I felt that, oh my goodness, like I'm doing this to my parents. And then I was like, no, I'm not meant to stay here. No, this is not my life. Like there was such a fucking mental battle going on. At 17, I had zero support. I had zero support. And so I made the choice to leave, and I left, and we didn't have a relationship for several years. We didn't have a good relationship. So no, if you decide to leave, the community is not going to support you in the community that I was raised in. The Amish that are new order, they may not put you in a bond or treat you that way, but they're definitely not going to be like, oh yeah, here's $2,000 or here's some money, go ahead and leave. They're definitely not going to do that either. The next question is, do they really grow their own food? So they do grow some of their food. They don't necessarily grow every single thing that they eat. And I say this because so many times I get remarks of like, somebody will buy something and they're like, oh, it has the Amish name on it. I'm like, you know, it's probably not made by the Amish. It's just marketing. And so, and the Amish still do buy their food. They still go and buy flour. They still go buy different things. Like they do buy the frozen foods sometimes that are in the frozen food section. So yes, they don't grow all their food. I would say all of them have gardens, and they do a lot of canning, and they do a lot of growing their own food. They do like their own butchering, so they have their own meat. They raise, a lot of their own meat and stuff or within the community. But yes, they still buy their foods from different stores too. And then the last question is, what is Rumspringen and why didn't you leave during Rumspringen? Well, let me tell you. The TV show, reality show, you cannot believe everything you see on there. It's not true. And I know, shocker, right? Because it's reality TV. But Rumspringen just means in the culture that I was in, the Amish that I was raised in. So at 16, you get to go with the youth group. So then, you get to go and hang out with the youth group. You play ball. There's a lot of drinking. There's a lot of partying. A lot of crazy shit that happens. Yes, they do party. They do drink behind their parents' back. Yes, I did do that too. Vodka and orange juice. Nasty. But anyways, they do that phase, right? So that's when they like start dating and that kind of thing. And we didn't have the opportunity. You don't get the opportunity to go Rumspringen and like experience the world. No, that's not what Rumspringen is. Rumspringen is literally, you get to hang out with the youth group on, usually it's Wednesday nights and Sunday afternoons and Sunday nights. And that's playing ball, like hanging out with each other. Then there's some off partying, there's some off not partying. So it just kind of depends on who your group of friends are, on what you're doing. But you don't get the opportunity to actually go and experience the world the way the TV reality show makes it seem like it is. You have a little bit more flexibility to go and hang out with your friends versus then when you're not 16, because it's a reoccurring thing where they always get together every Wednesday night, every Sunday night, and Sunday afternoon after church. So that's kind of the thing, but you don't get the opportunity to leave and try out the real world and then come back. That's not how it works. And I think a lot of people feel like that's how it works because that's how they see on reality TV, and it's not. So I get asked all the time, like, why didn't you leave during Rumspringen? And I'm like, well, that's really did not exist for me. So yeah, I was 17. I was still a minor. So technically I could have been told, you need to stay, but I didn't have the opportunity to like go try out the real world and then come back. That was not a choice. Now I will say there are some that will leave at maybe 18 and they may try, leaving the Amish and then decide, what, it's not for me. And I want to go back into the community, and then they have to go through these classes to actually join the church and to get out of the bond and all these things to actually come back into the community. Certain communities allow that, other communities don't allow it. So it kind of depends on what the rules are. Each community is a little bit different on what the rules are around the bond. And what the bond is basically is you're put into this bond where if you go back around your family, you can't eat with them. There's a lot of rules around it. So if I was to go to a funeral or a wedding, I would not be allowed to sit in the same room. I wouldn't be allowed to eat in the same table or eat at the same table as different members of the church. So that's kind of what the bond is. It's kind of like excommunicated or whatever you want to call it. But that's kind of how they are like put you over there in your own little world, which is fine, which is cool. It is what it is. But those are all the questions that I have gotten. If you guys have more questions or you want me to do another Q&A on other things in my life, I'm always open. I'm an open book to talk about anything. If you've been following me on social media, you know I talk about anything. Anyone who sends me a message, I'm always down to connect. I'm always down to answer any questions and also to help those that are struggling with leaving a culture, dealing with narcissist exes, dealing with going through divorce, whatever it is. I'm always down to help. I'm here to serve those that need my services. So I hope you have really enjoyed the Q&A. If you have questions, drop them below. I will always answer them. And until the next video, remember that you are an incredible human being and go continue to be the incredible human being you were called to be.